In this video, we're going to cover Nifty notes, more specifically the new note type pre-meeting contact, and we'll go over how to add them and a few things to keep in mind when you're recording pre-meeting contacts. So pre-meeting contacts are going to be documented as a Nifty note type. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you have access to the Nifty Notes node. It's this one with the little notepad icon. If you can't see this, that just means that you don't have the appropriate permissions right now, and you'll need to request that from whoever manages the user accounts at your agency. If you want to go ahead and see what that is, you can go to Tools, Manage Users, and then find your user profile. I'm going to pretend I am Mary Demo. Click Edit, go to the user permissions, and then you can see if you have the Nifty Note permission or not. So I set it up so that I have the ability to view, add, change, and delete. You'll just want to make sure that you ask for the appropriate permission level that makes sense for you. So that's that. Let's go back to the case file so that we can add a new Nifty Note. The demo site's a little bit slow, so just loading. Okay, so to add a Nifty Note, you're just going to highlight the Nifty Notes node and then click the Add button. You'll see that the note date and time is already filled out by the system, and it automatically selects today's date and time just to make it a little bit easier in case you happen to be adding it the same time you actually are doing it. If you're not, you're going to want to make sure that you put in the true time that the contact occurred, because that's an important time that is reported to the state. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the video. So you can do that by either typing in here or clicking on this calendar control button and then adjusting the date and time that way. So I'm going to leave it as is. The next thing is selecting the note type. This is required. The standard note type is the type of note that has always existed. It's just kind of for any general notes regarding the case that you can share with other agents and SILs. And then the pre-meeting contact, this is the new note type. So pre-meeting contacts are meant to be the first initial contact with the participant to schedule when your first face-to-face meeting will be. So it's typically a phone call between the transition navigator and the participant, or the participant's caregiver, to set up this first initial face-to-face meeting and kind of find out who needs to be there and any important or just general information about the participant before you go there. So it's also a good opportunity for the transition navigator to just introduce themselves and kind of get to know the participant at a informal level. So that's the pre-meeting contact, and since it's basically the beginning of your interactions with the participant, it's going to be one of the first things that you add into the system and document that exchange. So I'm going to select that and click Add. All right. So if you're familiar with the standard note type, you'll know that there's a few more questions with the pre-meeting contact. Can we contact the nursing facility, all the way down to what additional information would you like me to know? Those are all the new fields. The notes and contact method, person contacted, etc. All these guys will appear in the regular standard note type. So the ones at the top are kind of what make this a pre-meeting contact. So these are the questions that have been identified as things that you should probably kind of find out or talk to the participant about when you're doing this call. Something else to really pay attention to is the contact method type. So pre-meeting contact Nifty Notes will be included in the monthly export that CIM sends out to the state for each of the agencies, so that you guys don't have to do this and track it manually and send it yourselves. But as a part of that process, it's important to know certain dates, like the initial date of contact versus the initial date of a face-to-face visit. And so CIM needs to know basically what that contact method is, just in case you end up having a meeting where you don't do the CTA and it's in person. Then that's actually going to be considered a pre-meeting contact, because pre-meeting contact kind of means basically pre-CTA. And if you end up going out to the house and maybe the relative that is a crucial person that should be there isn't there, and you don't end up doing the CTA or whatever that reason is, if you went out and had a face-to-face visit but didn't do the CTA, you could add a nifty note that was a pre-meeting contact and just mark it in person. That way, we're reporting the right, initial face-to-face date to the state versus the first initial contact and stuff like that. So it's just important that you fill out the contact method when you're entering these notes. So otherwise, all these questions are pretty straightforward. Like the informal support person, contact info, if they have them, and you get that on the call, put that here. Legal support, great. Scheduled appointment date and time. This is the time that you guys come up with to hopefully have that first meeting and do the CTA. And then there's a couple fields about if you would like other people to be at the appointment and who that might be. And then any other additional information that you might want the transition navigator to know. This might be, kind of like critical information to, hey, just so you know, my daughter will be here and she's going to try to talk for me, and I really want to talk for myself. And so just please keep that in mind, or, something like that. So then there's also the regular notes fields, and that you can add any additional notes, the contact method like we discussed, who was contacted, their name, and then the phone number that you called. And lastly, there's duration of contact and stop date and time. Some agencies prefer to do one method over the other, so that's why we have both fields showing here. But if you only like to use the duration and just do the whole full minutes, or if you like doing the stop date time versus the start date time, that's fine too. So that's the pre-meeting contact. Adding a standard note is going to be literally the same process, only you're going to select the standard note type instead. So I clicked add again, and I'm going to pick standard. I have a different time, so it'll allow me to add this note. If I tried to add it at 4:40 again, it's going to ask for a different time. The system won't allow that. So click add. And now I have a standard note. And like I said, here are these fields that are shared with the other one that are kind of the general standard note fields. Now that I've added two notes, you'll be able to see in the nifty note summary, if you click on this top node, you can see both of those two notes. These fields are empty because I didn't actually answer them. But that's kind of a nice way to look at all your notes as time goes on, and maybe you have a lot more case notes that develop. This is a nice way to see them summarized. So that's the nifty note summary. And then lastly, I just want to talk about a few things to keep in mind when you're entering these things that I've kind of already said, but just want to restate since we have to report the pre-meeting contacts to the state as a part of that export. So the state wants to see that all referrals are being followed up with within 5 days of receiving them. So it's that's kind of where this importance comes from, just so that we basically make sure that we're sending them this contact did happen within 5 days, so that you guys don't get in trouble for anything regarding that. So the initial contact with the participant should always be documented as a pre-meeting contact. Even if you don't schedule the CTA, that's perfectly fine. You can have multiple pre-meeting contacts if you need to call back and schedule it at another time. But just the first time you contact them, you're definitely going to want to consider that a pre-meeting contact and put that in the system. That way, whatever your referral date was, we'll be sending that, and then we'll also be sending these pre-meeting contacts, and they'll want to be seeing that happened within 5 days of one another. And then something else to note is that if a CTA doesn't occur during the first face-to-face visit, and then that would be another time you add the pre-meeting contact. I talked about that already a little bit, but I just wanted to repeat it. And then just make sure you mark it as an in-person meeting when you do that, because there's several reasons that you may go out to the house or wherever the participant is and visit them and not actually go through a CTA. But if you make that in-person visit, you're going to want to mark it as in-person. And another thing to keep in mind is if the CTA is done during the first face-to-face contact, that you do not need to add a pre-meeting contact for that, because it's not really a pre-meeting anymore. It's just the CTA. So adding the CTA with the correct date will be just sufficient enough, and we'll have all the information we need. And then lastly, if you're tracking Nifty notes in a separate system, that's fine for standard notes, but for pre-meeting contacts, you'll need to add them in just because of this reporting to the state. So I know I've heard that from a couple SILs, so just keep that in mind, that you'll need to be entering pre-meeting contacts into our system as well. So that is Nifty notes and pre-meeting contacts.